but it's afternoon. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us for the second session in our primary school conversation series. Before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the lands on which we're all joining today, and pay our respects to elders past and present, and extend that respect to any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people joining us today. We acknowledge their continuing connection to land, waters, and community. My name is Bree, and I'm joining today from the lands of the Maramarang people on Yuin Nation. I do encourage you to share which lands you're joining from in the chat. Just before we begin, a few little housekeeping tips. Today's session is going to run for approximately 30 minutes. We will try and keep it to 30 minutes, but obviously there is lots to talk about, so I apologise if we do run a few minutes over. Please note that this session is being recorded and all registered participants will receive a link to the recording. If you need any technical support, if you can use the chat function. For any questions about the content, please use the Q&A box. We will endeavour to answer some of these questions, but obviously there are some time constraints around this session. And if we don't get a chance to answer them, we'll try and provide an answer to those questions when we send out the video recording afterwards. As I mentioned, this session is being recorded for future viewing, so please be mindful of this when asking your questions or engaging in the chat. And if you can please refrain from taking screenshots or making your own recordings without permission. As I mentioned, this is the second in a 4-part conversation series on supporting children with disability, developmental delay, and autism in primary school. So this series is brought to you by Belongside Families. That might be a new name to some of you. We were formerly Kindred. We've just gone through a name change last week. We are doing this in partnership with the Early Childhood Intervention Best Practice Network. So today we're going to be talking about understanding IEPs in primary school. And I'm very pleased that we're joined by 2 wonderful speakers. We have Keandra, who is an experienced primary school teacher, a former wellbeing learning and support teacher, and you're now working as an early intervention teacher with Early Connections. So thank you for being here. We also have Lorraine. So Lorraine's a parent of 2 autistic boys, Nicholas and Max, and she'll be sharing her family's journey with developing and implementing effective IEPs. With all of these sessions, I want to acknowledge before we get started that everyone's journey is unique. We encourage you to take what resonates with your situation and discuss it with your child's support network. This might include the educators, the school, therapists, medical professionals. The best outcomes often come from a collaborative approach where families work together with their child's team to adapt strategies that suit their specific circumstances. So let's get into it. Keandra, I'm going to go to you first. I'd love if you could help us understand what a well-crafted IEP actually looks like. What are those key elements that make it effective?
G'day, Bree, Lorraine, and everyone else watching. I'm joining from Gumbaynggirr country in Coffs Harbour, and welcome everyone and thanks for having me. I want to start by saying that an IEP is a legal document that aligns with many policies and legislation. It's a written document that outlines a roadmap to ensuring that every child receives the right instruction and support they need to succeed in school. There's no one-size-fits-all approach to an IEP. I've seen plenty of templates out there to support IEP development. However, they can be presented in different ways, but must be personalised to effectively plan for and meet the needs of the student that it's intended for and the context in which it's being used. An effective IEP is developed and reviewed in partnership with the child where appropriate. So that might be for older children within the primary school setting, parents, carers, therapists, and those that would be working with the child within the school, such as the classroom teacher, student learning support officer, APs, learning and support teachers, and different options within that. some key elements of a well-crafted IEP. So these are developed by a team around the child and personalised to the student's needs. And when I say team around the child, obviously children work with many people, including those at school, therapists, and families. And it's important that they all have a voice within this. The IEP would also include like clear, concise goals and objectives, and these would be developed using a strengths-based approach and in collaboration with the family. Uh, Usually you would see a profile page which would indicate learning preferences, student likes and dislikes, prior assessment, and these would all inform the goals that are made. They would also include adjustments, including who is going to do what and when in order to support goals. And then also a section on review dates. So when are the team going to be sitting down, and opportunity for ongoing tracking and evaluation within that as well.
Amazing. I'm just going to, before we move on, we have had a couple of questions already. We're going to run over. I know this, but the first question was just around, and I just want to clarify this as well for everyone that might be listening, but IEPs, are they just for children in mainstream classes?
No.
No.
Yeah, I knew that was the answer, but and then I've also got somebody just also in the Q&A box that have just asked that their child is in kindy at the moment. They do have an autism diagnosis, and can they ask for an IEP? So I think they've sort of approached the school a couple of times. It's kind of been pushed aside. Is that something a parent can actually request there be an IEP?
Yes. You can actually ask your school and keep hassling your school. I've done it before. Or you can also get if the school has a school counsellor or psychologist on the team as well, they can also assist with that. And also too, if you're not getting anywhere with your class teacher, you go through the steps of going through the AP, the assistant principal. And then if they're not helping, then you go through your deputies and your principals.
Yep.
And can I just add to that? An IEP is developed as a learning plan for children with substantial or extensive support needs. And this is beyond what a normal classroom teacher would provide within daily differentiation of catering for all the different needs within their class.
Amazing. Thank you for clarifying that. Now, Lorraine, thinking back to your first experience with IEPs, what do you wish you'd known from the start?
Well, first I just want to welcome everyone, and I'm with Bree. I'm from the Murmuring people on the Yuin Nation, so I'd like to welcome everybody as well. So my oldest, he's my second youngest child of 7, but he will be 11 in a couple of weeks, so he's in year 5. So 5 years ago, which was the start of COVID year. So when you go back 5 years ago, a lot has changed, but having that support person with you can make all the difference, whether or not it's your partner or a therapist or a friend or a family member that can come with you. Sometimes going into those initial IEPs can be very daunting and you are overwhelmed, especially if this is your first child and your first child with a disability as well. So that can be a big challenge in itself, accepting that. Be prepared. So any documents that you have, whether they're on or with the NDIS, bring them along, because the school can then incorporate some of those goals that you've got with NDIS into their IEPs as well. And I always create the All About Me documents and any other paperwork or medical paperwork that you may have that best supports your children. So I found that the more information you can give to the school, the better understanding that they can have of your child. The best thing is that you know your child best. So what works for them at home may not necessarily mean that it will work at school either. So you have to also consider those needs as well.
Yeah, Absolutely. And you did just mention around setting some of those goals, and some of them can align with the NDIS. But Keandra, how do you approach setting goals that are both meaningful and achievable in an IEP? And I'm just going to throw a little curveball in there too, because someone has said in the chat that school is saying that the IEP is only about academic needs.
Yes, so I'm going to speak about linking the academic needs with some of the other needs as well. I'll first speak about how I would approach goals in order for them to be meaningful and achievable. So I would start by following a strengths-based approach where I would assess and learn about the students' differences and learning preferences. So really focusing on having positive aspects of their abilities to develop that learning profile. And this would be in collaboration with the team around the child. So obviously, people are going to know different things about the child, and it's important that we listen to them and also include the student to create that agency and ownership within the IEP as well, where appropriate. I also thought in this step about looking back on previous IEPs might give some relevant information. Once I've done like background research, I would be planning for the IEP meeting. And this is an opportunity where the team around the child, so the family, classroom teacher, therapists, all of the people that are going to be working with the child, sit down and share valuable ideas. And there are some driving questions that have kind of framed how I would approach this. So first of all, what are the students' unique strengths and what has been helpful so far? So giving an opportunity for everyone to share, well, what is working at home? Is that something that we can support in this context as well? Also looking at, well, what is the goal and why is it important for the child? And number 3, looking at what evidence-based strategies or adjustments can be used to reach the goal. And then from this, we would develop long-term and short-term goals. The long-term goals are a much broader banner about supporting that child's needs, and the short-term goals should be more of an objective and following the SMART goal format. SMART being specific, so clear and concise goals so that everyone knows exactly what the child is working towards. Measurable, so is the goal able to be tracked easily and clearly? Agreed upon amongst all members within that meeting. Is everyone seeing value in that goal and committed to supporting the child with that goal? Realistic, so goals should be achievable, taking into account what can the child realistically do with the resources they have and the support that is needed. And also time bound, so every goal should have a set timeline. We don't want to create a really broad goal that just goes on and on forever. We're starting with the child's strengths and thinking where to next. Once I had sat down and developed the goals based on that SMART acronym or SMART format, I would make adjustments accordingly and track progress with regular input and communication with the family and therapists when needed, and continuing to monitor and evaluate the IEP because we know it needs to be responsive to the changing needs and progress of the child.
And I think as well, around those goals and that question around them being just academic, I know personally my son's in year 5. We have goals around self-care, toileting, mobility. He's a wheelchair user. So definitely there is a broad range of things that can be covered in an IEP. Lorraine, can you share an example of how Nicholas or Max's IEP has evolved as their needs have changed?
Yep. So, as I said earlier, so Nicholas is in year 5. So throughout kindy to probably year 3, we've had a through COVID year. So he actually didn't start full-time school, being on and off suspensions or partial days. So that also impacted on his learning. So then his IEP had to be adjusted to those strengths that he has, and then adjusted it to his behavior as well, to how we can adapt his behavioral needs in the IEP as well. So his behavior here become quite violent and aggressive. So how do we then minimize that to the best of his ability and not heighten him to then go, or how do I get him to learn something? So then we'd go through therapies. I'd have my therapist come to my IEPs and in immediate meetings where sometimes they'll be from return from suspensions, and we go through the IEPs and go, is this still accurate? Is this still what we want to work towards, or do we need to adjust that? So don't be afraid to bring in anybody that can support your child. Then on the other hand, I had Max transition from a support unit in a public school to a school for a specific purpose last year. So I then had to learn a whole different lingo and format as to how they do their IEP. So what Max had at the support unit in a public school was so different to the beginning when he started last year. So, and he's in year 3 this year.
Yeah. And I think that speaks to even different schools approach IEPs differently. Keandra and I were talking about this before we came in, even when it comes to how often schools review.
Yeah.
And I know we have actually had a question in the chat around how often should they be reviewed. Keandra, I might see if you've got a sort of suggestion around that. I know for us, very early in our experience, it was quite regularly. But now we're in year 5. We've actually got, quite a good team. We set some really great goals, and we might check in once or twice a year, or definitely once, but sometimes we do a second check-in in, depend on where Dax is at and where he is with achieving those goals and whether we need to reset or adjust. Do you have any thoughts on that, Keandra? Around how often?
Yeah, so look, the more regular, the better. And you might review them and look over them and say, oh, these are still valid. But I think 5 to 10 weeks, usually every term, would be a good place to aim, because we know that best practice would be that teachers are tracking these regularly within their daily routines. So yeah, look, it's about being on the same page. The regular review times are a way of everyone having input again. And once, like you said, Bree, once that well-designed IEP is established, there might be less of a need for a review. And every review should celebrate the progress that has happened within the time frame.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I was,
keep. I was going to
yes.
ask you around, and you've just brought it up around, how do we get everyone to stay on the same page around those IEPs?
Yeah.
Yeah, so as just mentioned, regular review times is one. Celebrating achievement and success within that. Teachers consulting and reflecting on the student's IEP in all stages of the teaching and learning cycle. So that would be when they're conducting assessment, when they're planning and programming, within their classroom practice, and also within the feedback and reporting. So could a teacher should be looking over a student's IEP when reporting on their learning. I've also heard of making IEPs accessible to those that are working with the child. So having them in a place that is known, and a teacher might direct the SLSO to that area to look over the goal, and therefore they know what might need to be supported within a small group to meet that child's needs. providing regular feedback to families and also offering them the opportunity to do the same. And that might also include therapists that have had new information come up. It's important that the whole team shares information between them, and also about what has been working, because we know children change so quickly, or that might be a little step that they're taking towards a bigger goal that can be incorporated across those different contexts. Also discussing a preferred method of communication between the teams. So how are you going to communicate? Are you going to send emails amongst each other? Are you going to have a Teams chat where you can share resources on there to support the child? That might look a little bit different, but as long as it's commonly agreed to. Recording meeting minutes. So often we have some great conversations with teams, but if it's not written down, sometimes our memory isn't always great. So particularly within that initial IEP planning meeting, it would be a good idea to have someone designated to taking the meeting minutes. And even if you as a parent checking with the school, is someone available to take the minutes? And I just want to reiterate that an IEP should be a living, breathing document. So it shouldn't be a document that has all of this initial work put into it from families, from the whole team, and then sits in a cupboard and is pulled out for the review time, maybe when it comes. It should be that teachers are consulting with it daily and embedding the goals and interventions on a regular basis.
Yeah. And I think we seem to be getting, there's a bit of chat and there's been a few questions around how often these get reviewed. And I think that's something quite important to talk about when you have those IEP meetings. Like, when are we going to meet again? And actually sort of setting that time. Okay, we're going to set this in place for the first half of the year. We're going to meet third week, like set it when you're setting that first goal. Because we've had a question that, you know, from someone whose IEP hasn't been reviewed since halfway through last year. So go to the school and ask.
I know sorry, Brie, I know with both my boys at the support unit, it was term 1 and term 3, usually about week 3 to week 5. And then now that Max is in a SSP, they do it in a semester. So they do semester 1 or semester 2. So one in each half of the year.
Yeah. So yeah, I think it's really great if you can discuss that when you're building that IEP, like how often are we going to meet? If I have concerns, how can I contact you so that we can organize a review meeting? Now I'm going to ask about balancing those academic goals with those social and emotional development in an IEP. So Keandra, I'll go to you first, and Lorraine, if you've got anything to add, feel free to jump in.
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah.
But yeah, so how do we balance academic goals, social and emotional?
So it's important that we consider a child holistically and within all developmental areas when we're looking at developing goals. As we know, social and emotional skills lay the foundation for developing literacy, numeracy, academic skills. Without these social emotional skills as a strong foundation, a student is not yet able to access academic learning. And for example, if they're not regulated enough to sit at a table, how are we going to support that emotional need in order to get to the academic goal? So we need to prioritize the goals, meet the child where they're at, and also have an overarching understanding that it is leading to an academic goal.
Yeah. Lorraine, do you have anything to add around balancing those academic goals with social emotional development?
Not really, but it's just sometimes teachers also, for me personally, some teachers need to understand just because of the size of my child doesn't mean they're at that level that they think they're at. They can make very good assumptions, but they need to understand that, yeah, okay, Nicholas is almost 11, but he's as, you know, this growing boy, he's almost 6 foot tall at 11, and he's got a mind of a 7-year-old. So they've got to factor that chronological age isn't always the best way to go through with things as well.
Yeah. I think, and this might speak to some of that, what we've been talking about is how often IEP get reviewed or adjusted. But have you got any examples of how you've handled situations where an IEP needed to be adjusted?
Yeah.
You go,
So
Lorraine.
sorry. So last year is probably Nicholas's best year of school. He only had like 3 suspensions for the year, whereas the year before he only did term 1, and then from term 2 to term 4 he was on and off suspensions constantly. So for him, then we had to readjust. Where is he at? What level are his literacy levels at? Where is he at numeracy? And where is he at socially and emotionally? So for him, our goal for this year for social and emotional is to try and get out of the enclosed playground where he would retreat constantly and to build up those social skills and play on the oval. So where you're talking about a kid that would go into a classroom at recess and lunch breaks with 3 kids in that playground to then going on the oval now with 300 to 400 kids on the oval. So in that self, that's a massive achievement, and he is exceeding that at the moment. So we're very proud of him doing that. And the fact that the other children on the playground are aware of his needs as well. So they understand that if something he doesn't get or understand, he can become heightened and then go, well, how can we adjust that? So we're also teaching the other kids around them how to approach the situation. How do we then go, oh, hey, Nicholas, just wait, let's stop and think. And then building up on those skills, not just for him, but the others around him as well. So that's been massive for him at the moment.
Yeah, that's great. And what about you, Kendra? Have you got any examples of how an IEP might have needed adjusting? I know how you've handled that situation.
Yeah, I want to jump to the academic goals. This kind of points out the academic goals versus all of the other developmental area goals. So I know a child, and initial academic goals were set for him, and teachers started to work on supporting these goals, although realized that because his social and emotional needs were not being met, he was unable to unaccess the learning. So it looked like he would come in dysregulated from a break time, and then would present to the office saying he was sick, and he would majority of the time be sent home. And if he didn't present to the office and remained at school, he would come into the classroom and was unable to engage because he was still heightened. So the teachers and the parent recognised that the IEP needed to be adjusted, because in order to work on towards those academic goals, we needed him to be in the classroom and we needed him to be regulated and his needs supported. And so we also needed him to problem solve around the social conflict that was happening and what was triggering him to become heightened, and supporting him to communicate this to his teacher. So we actually held a meeting with the family and the child's OT to adjust this, and get their input as well. And some of the adjustments included strategies for supporting that school refusal and the importance of remaining at school. So what was the plan around when he went to the office and said he was sick, when he was actually feeling very anxious about the conflict that had happened and that he needed to go and learn at a table. Also thinking about how the child's communication style could be supported within that. So the OT spoke about getting the child to draw what had happened in the playground, because that had been something that had been successful in the past. And the teacher also embedded like a visual communication cue. So as he came into the classroom, he would give a thumbs up or a thumbs down, and the teacher would then know he needed to be supported to regulate, and she would just hand him a piece of paper and he would go out into the wet area and draw a picture of what had happened, and she would allow that space then for him to use that as a visual to explain and retell the event. And also thinking about what extra support could an extra person be put on to support him within the playground. And the adjustments reflected the changing needs of the child and also supported the progress towards those academic goals. Without the IEP being adjusted, though, to reflect those communication, social and emotional needs, the academic goals would not have been achievable at all. So the academic goals could not be supported if the child was not able to engage in the learning or wasn't attending school.
Yeah. We have had a question around eligibility criteria for an IEP. Do you have any input on that? And I'm sure we can share some documentation from the New South Wales Department of Education. Obviously, there will be different criteria for each state that you're in, so definitely check with the Department of Education that you're in. But off the top of your head, Keandra, do you have any insights into eligibility criteria for an IEP?
Okay, so it's any child in outside of home care, any Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander students would need to have a learning plan, and that can look different. Any child with a diagnosis that is requiring extensive to substantial support, and within that extensive to substantial support, if the school is seeing a need, they might not necessarily have a diagnosis, but they would be implementing an IEP because that's needed to support the student and their needs within that environment.
Yeah. And I guess as well, I suppose if this, it's probably about having those conversations with school, and I guess re-meeting with them as needs change, and particularly if there isn't a diagnosis or you are new to school, sometimes it does take a bit of observation from the school to see what's happening in and around the classroom before they can sort of develop that. Mindful of the time, so I'm sort of getting to the end, but what advice would you give to parents who are just starting their IEP journey? Keandra, I'll go to you first and then we might go to Lorraine.
Be brave, be confident, communicate openly and honestly with your school. They want the best for your child. They want to be able to support your child. So they are your teammate. But make sure to advocate for your child, because no one else, like, you are their biggest advocate.
Yeah.
Lorraine?
Yep.
Yeah, I'd second all of that, what Keandra said, but also to ask lots of questions. Don't be afraid to ask questions. Especially sometimes teachers will just forget and they'll use the school lingo. So they'll go BSP, PLSP, and you'll be going, what? So don't be afraid to ask, because you need to understand what the school's asking in their IEP, as well as what you want to achieve as well. And sometimes for me, like, my background is also a teacher, but knowing that there's disability standards of education that the school has to adhere to as well for children with disabilities, and like the rights of the child. So for me, I've actually brought these into meetings when I've had issues. And so that the school was aware that I was aware of what they weren't meeting. So there are other avenues that the school needs to meet. And sometimes they do forget, because, you know, being a teacher is hard, and you're in it with a child from 9 till 3, but your work's like from 6 till 8 at night. So, but yeah.
And we'll be sure to include the disability standard of education and the rights of the child. We'll share links to that when we send out the video recording. And I think as well, I think for me, you know, we've been through quite a few IEP meetings, but sometimes I do take it away. Like, we might draft it, I'll take it away, I'll review it, I might talk with our therapy team about it, and then go back to them. So just knowing that you don't need to sign it then and there on the day, that you can have some input, you can have some time to think about it. But for any educators listening, what's one key element that you believe makes an IEP truly successful?
I struggle to pick just one, so I'm thinking collaboration, communication, consistency, commitment.
Yep.
Yeah. And also like active listening as well. Like I think just all those key elements in a meeting, to listen, to ask questions, and just remember you are your child's best advocate. So the teachers want to learn from you as much as you learn from them.
Yeah, absolutely. There definitely are going to be some resources that we will send out with this video recording. There's been a few people that have been sharing some in the chat. I know we have our own ones to share, but thank you so much, Keandra and Lorraine, for sharing your valuable insights and experiences with us today. I like hearing the advice and the real life examples because they help us get a deeper understanding of how to create a meaningful IEP and truly support children's learning and development in primary school settings. Thank you to everyone who has participated today. There has been lots of stuff happening in the chat and there's questions, and I've tried to cover them both, but I will review them. And if there's any other questions we didn't get to, we'll try and answer that in the resource email as well. So as I said earlier, this is our second session in our 4-part series. Our next session will focus on building collaborative school partnerships, which I think is really lovely off the back of learning about IEPs, because partnerships and collaboration are so important to not only making, you know, the everyday school experience work, but also enhance when we are developing those IEPs. So that is on Wednesday next week. So if you have registered, you will receive a reminder. I am just going to pop the event in the chat for anyone that hasn't registered. But yeah, I think today's discussion has really highlighted how a well-developed IEP can be a powerful tool for ensuring that your child receives the support they need to thrive in school. And like you said, Lorraine, remember that as parents, we actually bring valuable expertise about our child to the IEP process. So thank you so much. I'm so grateful that you're here, Lorraine. I know you're in between meetings and appointments, so thank you for joining from your car. I love car chats.
Thank you.
And thank you, Keandra. I know you've already shared some resources with me to share with participants, and we really appreciate that. So thank you all, and yeah, hope to see you both soon.
No worries. Thanks, Bree.